So, what happens when a global superpower indicts a sitting head of state? Well, today, we're going to dig into a report that takes a really close look at the U.S. case against Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro. We're going to follow the source's step-by-step breakdown of the charges, the alleged motives behind them, and the international firestorm it kicked off.
All right, so here's the game plan. We'll start with the original charges. Then we'll get to what the source calls a pretty stunning reversal from the Justice Department. From there, we'll explore the powerful motive the report claims is really at the heart of this whole thing, see how it sparked a debate in the UK Parliament, and wrap up with some tough questions about potential conflicts of interest.
Okay, let's kick things off. Our story begins back in March 2020. The Trump administration drops a bombshell of an indictment, and it sets off this chain of events that would ripple all across the globe.
Now, the central claim in that indictment, the one our source really focuses on, was this: that President Maduro was the leader of a drug trafficking organization known as the Cartel de los Soles, which translates to Cartel of the Suns.
Okay, but then the case took a really sharp turn. Let's look at what the source presents as a huge shift in the prosecution's story, a moment it really frames as a major turning point. The source points right to this New York Times headline, calling it a spectacular confession. It highlights that in a later indictment, the Justice Department just quietly dropped the claim that the Cartel de los Soles was an actual real group, a detail that, was pretty central to the original case.
So, what is the Cartel de los Soles then? Well, according to the source we're examining, it's not a real organization at all. The report claims the term is actually slang, something coined by Venezuelan journalists to talk about widespread corruption, not some specific structured cartel. And this is where the source really raises the stakes. It emphasizes that this term, which it's calling fictitious, wasn't just used in an indictment. No, the U.S. State Department had officially designated the Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization.
So if the source's claim is that the whole accusation was based on a group that doesn't even exist, then you got to ask the question, what was the real motive? Well, the report we're looking at alleges it was all about one thing: oil.
Now, to build its case for this ulterior motive, the source highlights this quote, which is attributed to former President Trump. He seems to be describing a successful tactical operation in Venezuela that, resulted in a countrywide power outage.
Then the source tries to draw an even more direct line to energy resources. It points to this statement, reportedly from a U.S. official, as pretty clear evidence that the primary motivation was all about getting control over Venezuela's massive oil reserves.
The source then zooms out, arguing that this isn't a one-off thing, but part of a larger pattern. It connects what happened in Venezuela to what it describes as a history of U.S. interventions in places like Iraq, Libya, and Syria. All of them, it alleges, were justified by bogus charges when the real goal was controlling oil.
The story now hops across the Atlantic, shifting focus to the international reaction. The source really hones in on a particularly fiery debate that it says went down inside the UK Parliament. According to the source, the UK was kind of the odd one out here. It reports that countries like France, Spain, Brazil, and Mexico, not to mention the UN Secretary General, all came out and condemned the US action as a violation of international law.
So this reported international consensus apparently set the stage for a real confrontation within the UK's own government. The source highlights several very pointed questions that were fired at the government from members of Parliament.
First, a direct challenge. This MP is quoted asking why the UK government wouldn't just join its allies and call the US action what they believe it is, a flat-out breach of international law.
The source then highlights another MP who reportedly used a hypothetical to accuse the government of a double standard. The argument was basically, look, if Russia had done something like this, the UK's response would have been immediate condemnation, not this silence.
And finally, the source presents this incredibly provocative question. It frames the UK government's quietness on the issue as a sign of being subservient, asking if the administration is anything more than Donald Trump's poodle. Oof. All right, for its final point, the source shifts its focus from the case itself to the whole process of political scrutiny in the UK, and it raises what it describes as some really serious questions about conflicts of interest.
The setting for this final point is a specific hearing of the UK's Home Affairs Select Committee. Now, this is a cross-party group of MPs, and it's their job to examine the spending, administration, and policy of the Home Office.
The source really zeroes in on one specific moment in this hearing, the part where members have to declare their interests. It highlights that 5 out of the 7 MPs present declared affiliations with various pro-Israel groups.
And then,
The source points to what it calls a moment of glaring irony. One of the committee members who had just declared their own affiliation is then shown questioning a witness about whether it's appropriate for people with predetermined views to be part of a decision-making process.
And this really brings us to the final question that the source's narrative leaves us with. By connecting this legal case against Maduro to the internal politics of a key U.S. ally, it's asking something fundamental about impartiality. Where is the line between just a declared interest and a full-blown conflict of interest? And in the messy world of international politics, who actually gets to draw that line?